All right, buckle up, because we are diving deep into this wild conversation with Bobby Lee and Theo Vaughn. We're dissecting Theo's podcast this past weekend to really get under the hood of Bobby's humor and worldview.
And let me tell you, this one is a wild ride, full of unexpected twists and turns. We're not just scratching the surface here. We're going deep into Bobby's personal struggles, his unique perspective on the world, the stuff that makes him tick.
Yeah, and it's hilarious right off the bat, like from the first minute. We've got Bobby playfully calling Theo a boiled egg as a pickup line.
Classic Bobby, right?
Okay.
Pushing the boundaries, not afraid to be a little outrageous.
Totally. But here's where it gets interesting. This boiled egg bit somehow morphs into this whole thing about the kinds of fans Theo attract. Like, what does that say about him?
It's brilliant. This blend of self-awareness and social commentary all wrapped up in this hilarious package. They start riffing on these stereotypes like supermodel gypsies with henna tattoos, and you can't help but laugh.
Right. Where do they even come up with this stuff?
But it also makes you think, what does draw people to certain comedians? Are we drawn to people who reflect something back at us?
It's fascinating. And speaking of unexpected, Bobby pulls out this gripe list he's compiled about Theo.
Oh man, the gripe list is pure gold. On the surface, it's all fun and games, but listen closely, and you start to pick up on these little insecurities, these vulnerabilities they're both revealing through humor.
Totally. Like when Bobby gets all weird about Theo joking about him being bisexual, you can tell there's something deeper there.
Absolutely. It's like he's using humor to deflect from those sensitive spots, you know?
Yeah.
And this theme of using humor to navigate potentially, I don't know, maybe uncomfortable topics, it keeps coming back. Especially when they get into the whole discussion about race and stereotypes.
Yeah, and it starts innocently enough. Bobby's comparing Theo to a Funko Pop, which is hilarious in itself.
Right, like Theo's this collectible item.
Exactly, and somehow that leads into this whole analysis of stereotypical Asian merchandise.
And this is where Bobby's comedic genius really shines, I think. He takes these seemingly silly observations and weaves them into this really nuanced commentary on how these stereotypes, how they actually impact his life.
Like people expecting him to be the spokesperson for all Asian people.
Or assuming that he's got all the answers about Theo just because they're both comedians.
Exactly. Like there's this underlying expectation because of their race.
And it's that subtle, everyday racism that so many people of color experience. But Bobby, he confronts it head on, and he does it with this sharp wit that makes you laugh, makes you think at the same time.
Totally. You're laughing, but you're also kind of squirming in your seat a little bit. Like, oh, yeah, I've totally thought that way before. Maybe I need to check myself.
Right. He's making us confront those uncomfortable truths, but in a way that's disarming and honestly kind of brilliant. And just when you think the conversation can't get any wilder, they go off on this hilarious tangent about, wait for it, the lack of an Asian Home Alone.
Okay, yes. The Home Alone tangent.
Uh-huh.
It starts as this throwaway comment, right?
Yeah.
And then all of a sudden they're brainstorming these hilarious reimagined classic films with an Asian twist.
Pure comedic gold. Like, I'm still laughing about their Castaway remake with Tom Hanks starting a volleyball factory.
Instead of talking to Wilson the volleyball.
Yes. And it plays on those stereotypes about Asian work ethic, but in a way that exposes how ridiculous those stereotypes really are.
Right. It makes you think, why hasn't there been an Asian Home Alone?
Exactly. It's like they're subtly pointing out this huge blind spot in Hollywood representation without missing a beat in the comedy.
And just when you think you've got them figured out, that you know where the conversation's going, they take this sharp turn into, well, let's just call it bizarre territory.
You mean the whole Asian mermaid debacle?
That's the one. They're talking about dating preferences, which is already kind of a minefield. And out of nowhere, Bobby drops this whole story about Asian mermaid folklore.
And you're sitting there like, wait, is he serious? Is this a real thing?
Right. You can never tell with Bobby. And that's part of what makes him so compelling, right?
Yeah.
That willingness to play with those boundaries.
Absolutely. He keeps you guessing. You never know what's going to come out of his mouth next. But here's the thing. Even when he's being outrageous, even if it ruffles some feathers, you can sense this underlying intelligence, this awareness of the power dynamics at play.
Yeah, and just when you think they've reached peak absurdity, they switch gears completely.
Yeah.
Bobby asks Theo about interviewing Donald Trump, and it's like the mood shifts on a dime. It's kind of like whiplash in a weird way.
Totally. But then that's Bobby, right? He'll have you laughing one minute and then hit you with something profound the next.
You're definitely in for a ride with this one. And this idea of, I don't know, needing support, like seeking out genuine connections. It kind of comes up again when they start talking about the whole fan interaction thing, like setting boundaries with people who recognize you.
Oh, for sure. Especially when you're in the public eye, that line can get really blurry.
Bobby tells this story about a fan approaching him at a gas station, wanting to take a picture, and you could just feel that conflict he's feeling, like want to be nice, but also needing some space.
Totally. And it's even harder nowadays when everybody's got a camera on their phone. It's like this constant pressure to be on all the time.
Exactly. And to Theo's credit, he really gets it. He talks about his own, like, strategies for how he deals with fans and protects his energy, especially when he's not feeling it.
Which is such a good reminder. You're allowed to have boundaries. Just because you're a public figure doesn't mean you owe everyone a piece of yourself 24/7.
Right. Like sometimes saying no is the healthiest thing you can do, both for you and the other person.
Absolutely. And that actually kind of ties into what I think is one of the most powerful moments in this whole conversation when they start talking about loneliness.
Yeah, when things take a more serious turn.
Like, here you have these two incredibly successful comedians, right? Dudes who make a living out of making other people laugh, and they're both admitting to feeling lonely and unsure sometimes. It's incredibly humanizing.
Yeah, they're really letting us see behind the curtain a little bit.
And it just goes to show that, fame and fortune don't magically erase your problems. If anything, they can amplify them.
Totally.
Yeah.
Like it's not a cure-all.
And that's what makes Theo's emphasis on the importance of connection, especially within the recovery community, so powerful.
Like when he talks about finding solace in those AA meetings in Montana.
Yes. Connecting with people from all walks of life, people who've been through some shit. It kind of highlights that universal human need for belonging, to have a space where you can be vulnerable and authentic without being judged.
For sure. And just when you think the conversation can't get any more real, Bobby shares that story that his childhood cat, Tommy. And man, it's heartbreaking.
And it's really telling. That's where we start to get a glimpse into, the roots of Bobby's comedic sensibility.
Especially his relationship with his parents. Especially his dad.
It's rough. The way he talks about his dad taking away his beloved cat because of his mom's allergies and no explanation, no comfort, just a very blunt, stop crying. That's heavy stuff.
You can just feel that childhood hurt resurfacing.
And it's a powerful illustration of how those early experiences with loss and emotional suppression, they can really shape our outlook on life.
It really makes you think about the long-term impact of that kind of upbringing. Always feeling like you have to push down those emotions, hide those vulnerable parts of yourself.
Totally. And it makes you wonder, does it ever really go away? Or are you always carrying that with you?
Right. Like, how do you even begin to unpack that?
And I think for Bobby, humor is a big part of it. It's like this shield he's built around himself.
I can see that. Always deflecting, always keeping things light.
But as we've seen throughout this whole conversation, those walls can only hold up for so long.
Totally. And that's what I love about this episode, I think. It's like we're getting these glimpses of the real Bobby, the one who's searching for connection, for a deeper understanding of himself and the world.
Yeah, he's figuring it out as he goes along, just like the rest of us.
Exactly. He's not afraid to be a little messy, a little contradictory.
And honestly, I think that's what makes him so relatable, because aren't we all a little messy and contradictory sometimes?
For sure. He's giving us permission to embrace those complexities.
Absolutely. To find humor in the midst of the chaos of it all.
So, as we kind of resurface from this deep dive into Bobby Lee's world, what do you think is the big takeaway?
Man, that's a tough one. But if I had to pick one thing, I think it would be the power of vulnerability.
To just be yourself, flaws and all.
Exactly, because in those moments of vulnerability, in those cracks in the armor, that's where the real connection happens.
That's where the good stuff is.
And who knows, maybe if we can all learn to embrace those parts of ourselves a little bit more, we can create a world where laughter and tears can coexist.
A world with a little more grace, a little more understanding.
Absolutely, a world where it's okay to not have all the answers.
And maybe, just maybe, a world with an Asian home alone.
Now that's something I can get behind.
This has been an amazing deep dive. I feel like we've really uncovered some fascinating layers to Bobby Lee's humor. And it makes you think, doesn't it? How does suppressing vulnerability shape our own comedic voices? How can we be more comfortable with those messier parts of ourselves, both in humor and in life? Something to ponder, folks. Until next time.